The final push, 2 days of campaigning left before the country goes to the polls. Robert spent the day with the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer.
So it's a combination of the big ambition, but also the small, first, important, practical steps to get the country back on its feet.
Meanwhile, the PM's been batting off suggestions he's given up.
I'm fighting hard for every vote. I don't take a single place or person for granted. But I don't want Britain to sleepwalk into the danger of what an unchecked Labour government with a supermajority would mean.
Well, as the 6-week campaign draws to a feverish end with the Lib Dem leader on a bungee, no less, we're with all the main parties tonight to test the temperature, also on News at 10. The battle to keep the far right from power after France's election earthquake and humiliation for Macron. Trump claims a big win as the Supreme Court rules he has some presidential immunity from prosecution. Dan's in DC.
Here's the overhead kick from Bellingham!
Rude Jude, Bellingham's goal celebrations investigated by UEFA. And Murray keeps Wimbledon guessing as Emma Raducanu claims the first British victory on day one.
You have to just do what it takes to get over the line, and honestly, watching the football last night, it was like winning ugly, like it all counts.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. For now, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is focused on just one thing: winning Thursday's general election. With that in mind, he denied accusations that his manifesto lacks ambition. There's plenty of it, he told Robert, in making sure the economy works for everyone. But when Keir Starmer dares to think beyond Thursday and looks to the horizon, he acknowledges that if he wins, he must take the country with him. He acknowledged that trust in mainstream politics is broken and, as the rise of the far right in France has shown, Labour needs to address the everyday concerns of so many who feel disaffected by politics.
A tricky line to tread for Labour's leader, here to gee up campaigners in Hertfordshire how to appear confident but not arrogant.
This is the final mile. These are the last hard yards, but the last steps are always the hardest.
Keir Starmer says he wants to govern from the centre, perhaps like France's President Macron, who has been humiliated this weekend in that country's parliamentary elections. They voted for the far left and even more for the extreme right. What's the lesson for a Labour government if you're lucky enough to lead one?
I do think there are really important lessons here. I genuinely think that people are exhausted with the constant division in politics, and we have to find a way through that, reach in to and understand why people feel disaffected with politics and politicians, and return politics to a sort of real force for good. Difficult to do.
If the far right take control of one of our most important neighbours, France, how will you work with the Rassemblement National?
We will work with whichever government is in place in any of our allied countries. Of course we will. The relations we have with those countries is sort of sits above the individuals in particular offices.
Just before the election, he told me his first big initiative to get the country moving would be to tear up planning restrictions. Is that still your ambition for the first weeks in government?
Yes, we cannot go on with the system as it is. Infrastructure takes years, housing takes years to build. We're too slow, we're too expensive, we're over budget, we cannot go on like that.
On to a thatched pub in Buckinghamshire, another traditionally blue county, because, as Starmer told me, he wants to prove there are no no-go areas.
We know that in every constituency it's a fight that will go down to the wire, that could have just a few hundred votes in it.
Finally, to the Cotswolds, where I joined Keir Starmer on his bus that doubles as a travelling office. Hello. That was the Shadow Chancellor. Does it matter to you whether you get more or less than that 40% that Corbyn got in 17?
I haven't given a second thought to that. I'm absolutely focused on making sure that we can win this election and bring about the change.
It's about seats, it's not about the share of the vote.
It's about seats, it's about having a mandate to take the country forward. I've never been a believer in looking backwards in life. I've always been a believer in looking forwards. I find it's helpful to look forwards and walk forwards and take things forward. So I'm not looking behind me.
We've arrived at a 70-acre estate close to where David, Lord Cameron and Jeremy Clarkson famously live. Could the true blue Chipping Norton set wake up on Friday morning in red country? Keir Starmer dares to dream. Robert Peston, News at 10.
Well, as for the Conservatives, some key voices have been indicating for a while that Labour are likely to win. The Prime Minister talked today of a Labour government as though it were virtually a done deal and raised again the prospect of what he described as an unaccountable Labour supermajority. But he's still battling on.
The Prime Minister sorting medicines in a warehouse in Staffordshire today and trying to inject some urgency into the final days of his campaign with a plea to those thinking of deserting his party.
I know many of you who supported us in the past have some hesitations about doing that again. But when you go to the polls on Thursday, you have to remember this is not a by-election. This is a choice about who governs our country for years.
Tory adverts have taken on a more dramatic tone too, portraying Keir Starmer as a thief as the party leans into scare tactics, with the polls refusing to budge. From this image of a family surrendering to Rishi Sunak himself amplifying the message of this ad today and suggesting that President Putin would prefer a Labour victory. None of it points to a party confident it's heading to the outcome it wants.
You've given up actually trying to win this election?
No, absolutely not. I'm fighting hard for every vote. I don't take a single place or person for granted. But I don't want Britain to sleepwalk into the danger of what an unchecked Labour government with a supermajority would mean. And that means handing Labour a blank cheque that people won't be able to get back.
Rishi Sunak certainly is still fighting, visiting 4 seats today in the Midlands, but with majorities ranging from 13,000 in Nuneaton to nearly 23,000 in Hinckley and Bosworth, they would have been considered very safe seats in 2019. ITV analysis shows over the whole campaign he's been to 51 constituencies, 43 of which are Tory, with an average majority of over 12,500. That's applying 2019 results to the new boundaries, which suggests they're only hopeful of stemming losses rather than making gains. At a cricket training session this afternoon, Rishi Sunak was eager to have a go himself. The Prime Minister testing his skills here, and earlier he reached for a sporting analogy, comparing his position to that of the England football team, saying they showed how important it is to work your socks off to the last minute, even when some say it's all over.
Let's fight for our vision of Britain.
It isn't over yet, and the Prime Minister was cheered by party members tonight, but the message of this campaign in the crucial last few days is one of fear, not hope. Romilly Weeks, News at 10, Warwickshire.
So that's the latest on the Conservatives and before that Labour. Let's find out now where the other parties are with 2 full days to go with the whistle stop around the campaigns. Starting with the Liberal Democrats, and Chloe's been travelling with them throughout. More stunts today, Chloe. But are there more serious messages cutting through, do you think?
Well, that's right, Julia. They certainly seem to have cranked things up a notch for this final few days of campaigning. This morning it was bungee jumping in Eastbourne. Look, not everyone agrees with the way that Ed Davey has carried out his campaign. There are some that say that if he wants to be in government, he really ought to take himself a bit more seriously. But I was talking to one of the party's senior strategists this morning, and he was telling me that the Liberal Democrats have always seen themselves as a party that's been good at what he called the ground war. In fact, he said they've now knocked on more than 2 million doors since this campaign began. But this, he said, was all about being more effective at the air war. That is, getting Ed Davey seen, getting him recognised, getting him heard, so that when it comes to those more serious messages, people are already listening. And on that front, they seem to feel they've done pretty well. The mood on board that bus over the past couple of days has been increasingly buoyant. I have to say, even Sir Ed Davey has had a bit more of a spring in his step. They seem to feel this campaign is going well for them. They hope on Thursday night to reclaim their position as Britain's third largest party. What they won't do is tell you how many seats they are hoping to win, but they say they are feeling confident, more confident than when this campaign began. And it is just a couple of days now till we find out whether they were right to be.
Indeed, Chloe, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's talk about the SNP now. They're talking up their chances of holding on to seats previously thought to be going Labour's way. Peter's in Glasgow tonight, and I suppose if you're looking for some nail-biting races, Peter, look to Scotland.
Absolutely, and there have been a few polls putting Labour in front. That tends to be the trend so far, but those polls admit that about a quarter of the seats are well within the margin for error, and that is why the SNP today were issuing this rallying cry saying Scotland is too close to call. They're focusing on their point of difference now. That is migration, a big point of difference. They're saying that they want more migrants to come here because Scotland has a declining working age population. Now, I understand from speaking to people in the Labour Party that they're not looking to devolve these powers, but they're looking to set up a migration advisory committee that could create a tailored visa scheme for areas like Scotland to tackle these problems. Now, I put it to John Swinney, would this be acceptable? Here's what he said.
The Scottish Government will of course engage in that, but I have to insert a note of caution that that suggestion comes from the Labour Party in Scotland against a backdrop of total hostility towards immigration from the UK Labour Party, and as we all know, the UK Labour Party calls the shots on these issues.
Now, as I said, the SNP issuing a rallying cry, throwing huge resource at the last week of the campaign. We can see now their battle bus that they launched on Friday. A little detail here, that's actually the Celtic Football Club team bus that's been repurposed during the pre-season. Scottish Labour, you'll never guess which Scottish football team bus they've borrowed. Of course, Rangers. So much like in Scottish football, we know the election here in Scotland is going to be a fierce contest, very much a two-horse race.
OK, Peter, thank you for that. Let's go on to the Greens now and talk to John. They're only targeting a handful of seats, John, aren't they? But arguing that they could be in a position to put significant pressure on a potential Labour government.
Yeah, the Greens' message is vote Green to keep an incoming Labour government honest, and they're trying to outflank Labour on the left, not just on the environment, but on issues, for example, like health, where there have been some very eye-watering promises and some very eye-watering bills attached to them as well. Today, the Greens have been talking about a £22 billion plan to fix Britain's crumbling hospitals. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has calculated that over the course of a full parliament, across all government spending, the Greens would have to raise an extra £170 billion of spending. But the Greens say, don't worry, it's all costed, our figures all add up.
We're the only party being honest about what's really, really needed to make sure our public services work again. The NHS needs a serious amount of money, and we are talking about putting some new taxes only on the very broadest shoulders. People with more than £10 million in wealth, people who currently get a discount on national insurance, will take that away at the higher levels of income. These are things that will raise enough money to properly fund the NHS.
For a successful night, the Greens need their vote concentrated in a handful of constituencies. They need to pick off wavering Labour voters, and Julie, they need tactical voting as well.
OK, John, thank you for that. And in contrast to the other parties, it was a quieter day for Reform. Harry joins us from Clacton. It might have gone a little quiet in the last few hours, but this is a party with this leader that's put a rocket up the election.
Yeah, that's right. And it's Nigel Farage, as you say, that has really terrified Tory candidates by entering this race. And I think it's fair to say excited parts of the British public. And Nigel Farage in the past few weeks has been trying to harness that excitement, touring the country, speaking to packed out town halls, culminating this Sunday in a huge rally in Birmingham, 4,000 people there, the biggest event in number terms anyway of this election so far. But Nigel Farage has been clear. His mission goes beyond this election. He wants to try and be Prime Minister in 5 years' time, wants to reshape the right of British politics. To do that, He needs to get himself elected to Parliament and could do with a few more Reform MPs too. So this week is all about the hard yards, knocking on doors, trying to get out the vote in a few key constituencies. Succeed, and Nigel Farage is arguably the most influential person on the right of British politics. Fail, and he is an 8 times losing candidate for Parliament.
OK, Harry, thank you for that. And you can see all the candidates standing in the seat of Clacton on the screen right now. Well, I'm joined now by Robert, who spent the day, as we were saying earlier, with the Labour leader. And I thought it was really striking that it was actually an election in France that provided us with some of the most sort of insightful commentary from the Labour leader when you questioned him about it today. Just take us through it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, we're into, the gruelling last few days. For Keir Starmer, the priority, he said to me and to a bunch of activists that he saw in the southern part of England, was to get the vote out. I mean, it's the sort of end of new messages, it's the end of new initiatives. It's just about trying to persuade those people who've said they're going to vote for Labour, try and get them out, and the same challenge we just heard from around the country for all the other parties. But he did become animated and spoke a bit differently in the wake of that astonishing result we saw over the weekend in France. A centrist president humiliated by the right-wing Rassemblement National, a party with its roots in, some would say, racism and very strongly in the past anti the EU, getting more than 30% of the vote. The far left also polling incredibly strongly. So, parties that simply want to tear up that kind of centrist consensus, as I say, there'll be a second election next week. The far right could be in power in France, a remarkable thing. And for somebody like Keir Starmer, who wants to govern from the centre, the message for him, and he was absolutely explicit about this, is that he knows that voters don't have the tribal loyalties they had. And if he lets them down, if he wins, he himself could find himself in that kind of humiliating position that Macron is in sooner than, anyone might possibly believe, and certainly much sooner than he would like.
OK, Robert, we'll have a bit more on France very shortly. Thank you very much indeed for that. Well, during an election campaign, party workers never know what they're going to find when they knock on doors. Similarly, homeowners might get a bit of a surprise too.
You can't answer the door right now, but if you'd like to leave a message, you can do it now.
My name is Theresa May, and I'm here supporting...
It's not every day a former Prime Minister is captured on doorbell cam. Robert, Anushka and I discussed Mrs May's doorstep demeanour and the possible candidates in any Conservative leadership contest on our podcast, Talking Politics, this afternoon. It goes out live every weekday afternoon at 4 on ITVX. You can catch up anytime or listen wherever you get your podcasts. Now, as Robert was explaining a moment ago, yesterday's French parliamentary vote has seen a surge in support for the far right. President Macron's gamble of calling a snap summer election has backfired and then some. His own allies are warning that the National Rally Party stand, as they put it, at the gates of power. They came out on top, taking 33% of the vote. The Alliance of France's Left, the New Popular Front, came in second with 28% of the vote, while Macron's Ensemble Alliance received 20%. Looking at where the far right made gains, it appears to be predominantly rural areas away from the country's major cities. Now, Mr Macron and rival left-wing parties have agreed only one of them should stand in certain constituencies to try to see off the far-right challenge.
3 times she has run for the presidency of France, but never in all that time has she come as close to power as she is now. Marine Le Pen will not be the next Prime Minister here, but the party she controls is now the country's dominant political force. And her protégé, the 28-year-old Jordan Bardella, may soon be sharing power with President Macron. Revelling in last night's victory, he insists is not the far right, but the far left that people should be afraid of.
Un péril existentiel pour la nation française.
They are an existential danger to France, he claimed. They want to release 20% of prisoners, disarm the police and create new taxes. The collapse of the moderate centre in French politics has been spectacular, especially in northern cities like Lens, where the far right won comfortably. Amid closed-down shops and boarded-up cafes in a ghostly town centre, there's a queue outside the food bank, and those with money left at the end of the month shop in cheap street markets. Little wonder Macron's centre party got fewer than one vote in 10 here. Yes, crime and immigration are important, but the newly elected Member of Parliament for Lens told me his win was all about the economy.
When you were campaigning, what was the single biggest issue that people said to you was the reason they were voting?
C'est la fin du mois, les factures.
Their bills at the end of the month, the cost of living. People were coming to me to say they just can't make ends meet. They can't pay electricity, water, gas. If France is now in a mess, there is no doubt who's getting the blame. The president who called an election when he had no need to.
This time it is, one would say, with the suicide of President Macron.
Is this his fault?
Yes, it was absolutely unnecessary. I mean, he took a huge risk. He will be remembered as the David Cameron of France. An unnecessary bet that destroys him, his country, and weakens Europe.
Perhaps the only bit of good news for President Macron in the last 24 hours is France's talented and multiracial football team winning this evening, led by a captain, Kylian Mbappe, who says he wants to win this tournament for a country that represents my values, our values. It may not save Macron next Sunday, but it could make things less bad. James Mace, News at 10, Paris.
Well, the outcome of the American election may have been tipped in Donald Trump's direction by a ruling in the US Supreme Court today. It decided past presidents do have some immunity from prosecution, which all means he won't end up on trial for trying to overturn the 2020 result, at least until after this November's election. Dan joins us now from outside the Supreme Court. And how significant could this decision, which was a complex one, be for the election, do you think?
Well, look, Julie, I think the big picture here, as you said, is that this will delay this January the 6th election subversion case, kicking it down to the lower court, effectively, the Supreme Court has done. They've said, as you mentioned, that the president enjoys immunity from prosecution when acting officially. He doesn't necessarily when acting unofficially. And so it will be for the lower court to now pick through this indictment and decide when was Donald Trump acting officially around January the 6th and when was he acting as a president. And the result of that is going to be a lengthy delay of many, many months. Unsurprisingly, this court behind me divided along ideological grounds. So the 3 liberal justices on the court dissented from the 6 conservative ones. And one of those liberal justices, Sonia Sotomayor, issued a really stinging rebuke of the decision of her peers on the bench. She said they were breaking new and dangerous ground, and in every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. And she finished her dissent by saying, with fear for our democracy, I dissent. So very strong words and unusual from her. Donald Trump, unsurprisingly, describing this as a big win. But this comes just 5 days after that terrible performance by Joe Biden in Atlanta in that first televised debate. So the Democratic Party really reeling after 2 pretty terrible events for them. I think they are hoping, the Democratic strategists are hoping, there is a glimmer of hope on the horizon to shift the news agenda a bit next week, because that's when we will get the sentencing of Donald Trump for a completely separate case, that hush money case in New York. So for them, they'll be focused on that and hoping to shift these terrible headlines over here.
OK, Dan, thank you very much. Some of the Caribbean's most beautiful and popular holiday islands are being pummeled by the most powerful hurricane ever to be formed this early in the season. Hurricane Beryl is working its way from east to west, from Barbados, Grenada, towards Jamaica. It's been tearing apart homes and uprooting trees in Grenada. It's the first Category 4 storm to appear in the Atlantic in June. It's been fuelled by record warm waters. Now, cast your mind back to 2019, and levelling up was the big promise of the Conservatives in that election. This time, not so much. We've been taking a look at whether things have changed and hearing how, if anything, the gap between North and South has widened, not levelled.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
At Shipley Pool, the Bradford synchronised swimming team is in training. Not so long ago, these swimmers represented Halifax, but they were forced to relocate. Here's why. £12 million of levelling up funding was supposed to transform Halifax Leisure Centre. It closed 2 years ago and building work still hasn't started.
We haven't got a new facility, we haven't got any facilities. To me, that's a testament that levelling up hasn't reached, the north where we are today.
The government set aside £10 billion of funding for levelling up to date. Just over £1 billion has been spent, and 85% of the projects given the green light in the first round of awards have been delayed.
It's not good enough so far. We must do better.
Andy Haldane was appointed by the government to advise on levelling up. We interviewed him in Bradford.
We sit here in the youngest city in the UK with too few young people making good on their potential. There's absolutely not job done. Absolutely this needs more heave-ho, money and powers and energy.
Boris Johnson swept to power in 2019, promising to get Brexit done and to level up every region of the UK. Haldane says leaving the EU actually made levelling up more difficult. Now, the gap in living standards between Yorkshire and London has widened to £6,000 per household since the last election. Indeed, living standards in every part of the UK, except the South East, have fallen further behind the capital, according to the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. Andy Haldane insists levelling up can still be delivered, but doing so will require greater public investment. Translation, the government needs to spend more money building assets like roads, railways, bridges, schools and hospitals. Since 1978, the government has spent an average of 1.5% of national income on public investment. The last government increased it, but under both Labour and Tory plans, it is set to fall. NISA says public investment needs to be raised to 4%. Haldane agrees and says the next government could do this by borrowing more. But here is the problem. Labour and the Tories have both pledged to get debt falling, making extra borrowing impossible. Haldane says ditch the rules.
The fiscal rules that are pretty similar across both of the main parties need to be, at best, tweaked, at worst junked for something more sensible, something that enables that investment, that catalyses that growth. Whoever comes to power has an obligation, politically, economically, morally, to do what's right for many, many millions of people across our country.
Andy Haldane wants to see greater boldness than is written in the manifestos. Liz Truss spooked the markets, but he believes investors would applaud borrowing in order to fund investment and economic growth. The Levelling Up project is still alive, but in the next Parliament, it's sink or swim. Joel Hills, News at 10.
And if you haven't made your mind up yet, we've put all the parties' main policies over on our website. Just head to itv.com/news. Bereaved families in and around Hull who have been worried they may not have the right ashes from the cremations of their loved ones have had a knock on the door from the police. Officers have been investigating funeral directors in the city since March. They've now visited 163 families in the past 2 weeks. The England manager Gareth Southgate has often told his players they have a chance to write their own story. After narrowly avoiding an embarrassing exit from the Euros yesterday, the hero of that particular hour, Jude Bellingham, has written another one England would probably rather forget. Tournament officials are investigating an offensive gesture Bellingham made after his crucial goal.
With barely seconds to go, Jude Bellingham saved England's entire campaign. The celebration, he revealed later, was fuelled by the team's many critics. But as he walked back to the halfway line, he made a gesture that UEFA is now investigating for potentially violating the basic rules of decent conduct. Bellingham posted that it was an in-joke aimed at friends. If UEFA decides it wasn't, he could well be fined or, even worse, suspended. As joint top scorer, it would be an outcome Gareth Southgate could well do without.
Southgate in England came about as close to the edge of the precipice as you can get last night and showed real spirit coming back from the brink. But character and one world-class intervention can only take you so far. They simply cannot continue this form and keep getting away with it.
The squad, though, are just grateful to survive another day in Germany.
We fought right at the end, and you know, that team spirit, that togetherness shows character. People coming off the bench, putting a shift in. That's what the squad mentality is about.
As a fan, it was a nerve-shredding roller coaster, albeit with a happy ending.
I mean, to get that sort of goal in the last minute, I mean, we loved it, absolutely loved it.
It wasn't great, but a little bit of magic saved you. With the players you've got, you can almost rely on that a little bit, like someone is going to do something at some point.
With or without Bellingham, England are still out in front with the bookmakers to lift the trophy later this month. Fingers crossed they can all see something the rest of us are struggling to at the moment. Steve Scott, News at 10, Blankenheim.
Finally, the old slogans are often the best. You can't hurry a Murray is as true tonight as it ever was. So Andy Murray still hasn't ended the will he, won't he saga about playing tomorrow in what is likely to be his last Wimbledon. Emma Raducanu did, though, give the home fans something to cheer.
With Glastonbury over, the sight of rows of tents can only mean one thing: the never-wavering optimism of British tennis fans queuing for tickets at Wimbledon. This year, their hopes are to see Andy Murray as the headline act on centre court for what could be his farewell singles match.
I think everyone here probably wants to say goodbye to him and cheer him on, see if he can get one more win.
It'll be great since it'll be his last tournament and he's such a great player. So we're excited, hoping he'll actually come tomorrow, so that'll be nice.
You don't want him kind of limping off after a set and a half, but he will fight like anything to get onto that court because you know how much it means to him, so fingers crossed for him.
Murray was seen on the practice courts at lunchtime just 9 days after surgery to remove a spinal cyst that's weakened his leg. But his decision on whether to play has now been postponed until tomorrow, when he's due to be third up on centre court, playing against Czech Tomáš Machač.
Feeling a little bit tight,
Day one
nervy,
started
yeah.
with 19 British singles players in the championships, but first to fall was Heather Watson. Knocked out by her Belgian doubles partner Greet Millen. Arthur Ferry, along with Charles Broom and Liam Brodie, were also eliminated in their first-round matches. But Emma Raducanu, back after surgery ruled her out last year, gave centre court something to smile about. She eased through to the second round against lucky loser Renata Zarazua, who replaced an unwell Ekaterina Alexandrova.
Game, set, match, Raducanu. Who is that still out?
Cheered on by David Beckham and Sir David Attenborough in the Royal Box.
You have to just do what it takes to get over the line, and honestly, watching the football last night, it was like winning ugly, like it all counts.
So tonight, British hopes rest on the women. Raducanu, Lily Miyazaki and Sonic Hartel all through to the second round. But British prayers are with Murray. Martha Fairley, News at 10.
And that is it for tonight. We will see you tomorrow. Good night.